Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to the final session of today. Today we're gonna have here is Izzy Fraser from STEM Untapped, talking more about the women in STEM, and as the top title of the talk says, why we need more women in STEM. So, just to give a bit of background, Izzy is the host of STEM Untapped, and she's been working for a long time in this industry, and she aims to kind of bring up the more of the underrepresented groups of into STEM more. And with that, I'll pass it on to Izzy, and the stage is yours. So you can share your screen,
You.
and we can get started.
Excellent. Thank you. Here we go. Okay, you got me? Patrick, you've muted, so I'm going to assume it's a yes.
Yep, all is working great.
Excellent. Thank you. Hi, so my name is Izzy. I am, like Patrick said, I work for STEM Untapped. I'm the program manager and podcast host. STEM Untapped is a social enterprise, which means it's a not-for-profit, and our mission is to get more girls and non-binary folk into STEM. So, as you know, science, technology, engineering, and maths. So we do this in lots of ways, including producing the STEM Untapped podcast, publishing blogs written by our role models, including Adriana, and sharing useful resources on our Instagram and LinkedIn. So today, I want to talk to you about why we need more women in STEM. Women, girls, and non-binary folk are underrepresented in STEM careers and education. A lot of the data I'm going to use in this talk refers to the UK and the USA, but it's important to know that this is a problem worldwide, and it is a problem. It's easy to say, like, it's fine, let's just keep going the way things are. The status quo is not a problem. But I disagree, and I think that you do too, which is why you're here today. So, have you heard of the phrase, you can't be what you can't see? Well, this applies to women in STEM. While there are obviously lots of amazing women and non-binary folk working in STEM, for many reasons, they aren't as visible as their male counterparts. It's been documented again and again that one barrier to more girls and non-binary teens getting into STEM is a lack of relatable role models. So at STEM Untapped, we connect students with inspiring role models. If at the end of this talk, you want to hear more from them, you can listen to our podcasts on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get them. You can go on our Instagram at STEM Untapped, and you can read blogs from our role models on our website, untappedinnovation.com/STEM-Untapped. So for the first part of my talk, I'm going to give you lots of numbers. It is a lot of numbers. This data is quite negative, and I find myself getting annoyed about it. But I want to give it to you so that you can understand the bigger picture. But I don't want you to get bogged down by it, because there are things that we can do together to change this. So in the UK, only 26% of the STEM workforce is female. This rises to 35% in the US, but considering half of the world's population is female, we don't see any reason for the STEM workforce worldwide not to be split 50-50 too. These numbers are actually worse for BAME women. In the UK, only 2% of boards and senior exec teams are women of colour. In the US, Black and Hispanic workers are underrepresented in STEM compared with their share of the population, while white and Asian workers are overrepresented. Black and Hispanic women are the lowest paid in the US STEM workforce. So a staggering fact is that in the UK, 65% of the STEM workforce are white men. I haven't actually been able to find any clear data about non-binary STEM workforce. The data sets don't specify anything about non-binary folk. In fact, the data sets I could find refer to male and then female and non-binary, as though being a non-male means you are the other. This is known as the data gap. And if you're interested in this, I urge you to read this book, Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. I will refer to this again later in the presentation, actually, but while you listen to the rest of what I have to say, I want you to keep this phrase in mind that she said: what is male is universal, and what is female is niche. So we might not be able to see non-binary folk in the data, but we can learn about some LGBTQIA+ folks' experiences in STEM. As of 2019, 20% of trans people working in STEM had considered leaving their jobs. And a third of physicists in America had been urged to stay in the closet to progress their careers. So far, we've been talking about STEM in general, but actually women are overrepresented in health-related jobs and massively underrepresented in IT and engineering. And this is in part because the majority of care roles across the world are done by women. Interestingly, while the share of women doctors has steadily increased over the past decades, women doctors tend to earn less than their male counterparts. In 2016, US women doctors were paid nearly 20 grand less per year. What makes all of this even more interesting or frustrating, depending on your mood, is how girls perform in STEM at school. So this year, in the UK, in the GCSE exams, which are for 14 to 16-year-olds, girls outperform boys in almost all the core STEM subjects. So boys only just outperformed in physics and maths, but it was really close. Some more bad news. A report published about the UK gender pay gap in November this year, like literally just reported, shows that on average, men earn 10.7% more than women. And at this rate, it's going to take another 28 years until the pay gap closes and pay is equal. So I will nearly be retiring then. This is worse in America, where the gap is on average 18% and doesn't look to be closing. And this is despite the fact that women in the US today are more likely than men to have graduated from college. As well as the gender pay gap, we need to look at the ethnicity pay gap, which there's so much more to talk about. I could do a whole talk about this. But this actually shows that the dual impact, like sort of top line shows that the dual impact of sexism and racism means that many women of colour are dropping out of the workforce entirely. In the UK, women of Indian, Black, African and Chinese heritage are penalised 11 percentage points more than their white counterparts. So it has been documented that although girls perform better or nearly equal to boys in STEM subjects, as they get older and older, less girls study STEM and go on to work in STEM. This is known as the leaky pipeline, and this is something that we want to reduce at STEM Untapped. It's not just that there are less women and non-binary folk working in STEM. Actually, there have been loads of amazing non-men who have contributed and achieved huge things, but often their stories have been hidden. We all know the word history, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about STEM herstory. Dame Jocelyn Bell Burnell. She is a Northern Irish astrophysicist. She's 80, she's still going. She's retired from academia, but she still works in public outreach. She has received countless awards and honours, 2 of which have been renamed after her. The £50 banknote in Northern Ireland has her picture on it. But there is one prize that she didn't win, and I think she should have done. And so did lots of other people. So in the 1960s, Bell Burnell helped her team at Cambridge University to construct a massive radio telescope designed to monitor quasars. And when I say massive, I mean massive. It covered 4 acres. By 1976, this telescope was operational, and Bell Burnell's job was to analyse the data it produced. At point, she was reviewing 96 feet of paper per night. In this data, she began to notice a pattern. There was this tiny anomaly that didn't fit with the patterns produced by quasars, and she brought this anomaly to the attention of her male supervisor, whose name was Anthony Hewish. And at first, he dismissed this as her making a mistake. However, she persisted, and it turns out she was the first person ever to observe pulsars. Pulsars are rotating neutron stars that emit beams of light along their magnetic poles. This light carries information that gives scientists more information about the densest material in the universe, with the exception of whatever happens inside a black hole. This was huge scientific news. This was amazing. But the press were just as interested in the fact that one of the team was a woman. Quote, "My male supervisor was asked the astrophysical questions while I was the human interest. Photographers asked me to unbutton my blouse lower, and journalists wanted to know my vital statistics and whether I was taller than Princess Margaret." Unquote. In 1974, the Nobel Prize for Physics was awarded to the team that discovered pulsars. That's how important it was. But Jocelyn Bell Burnell was not named as a recipient of the prize. That honour went to the 2 white men who worked on the discovery too, Martin Ryle and Anthony Hewish. She was overlooked for the Nobel Prize because she was A, a grad student at the time, and B, a woman. as I said before, Dame Jocelyn Bell Burnell has gone on to do loads of amazing things. She's worked at multiple universities across the world. She was the project manager for the James Clerk Maxwell Telescope in Hawaii. She was president of the Royal Astronomical Society and the first woman president of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. She is awesome. But what I love most about her is that she has and continues to work hard to encourage women, ethnic minorities, and refugees to become physics researchers. And she has donated millions of pounds to further this cause. Okay, Emily Warren Roebling. I'm next going to talk to you about Emily. She was born in New York in 1843, and she was advised as a child that women didn't need a higher education. Regardless, as a teenager, she attended an academy where she studied, among other subjects, history, astronomy, and algebra, as well as, obviously, needlework and housekeeping, because you need to learn how to do that. In 1865, she married Washington Roebling. He was the son of a prominent German-American civil engineer called John Roebling, who was John was in the process of designing the Brooklyn Bridge. Soon after their marriage, she traveled with her husband to Europe to research caissons. They're these like really cool complex structures that allow workers to dig in the ground underwater, and they provide like a space of air so that you can get to the ground under the water. And these would be really important and would be used for the bridge's foundations under the East River. Back in New York, soon after construction started, her father-in-law contracted tetanus. He died a month later. Her husband, Washington, took over the role of chief engineer, but during construction, he too fell ill. He suffered from an illness called Caisson's disease, which we now know as decompression sickness from going down below the water. And that left him partially paralyzed, blind, deaf, and mute. So Emily took over. In the mid-1800s, it was unheard of for women to study engineering, but that didn't stop her. She took notes from her husband about what work remained to be done. She studied complex maths, oversaw contracts, dealt with the politics behind the project. For over a decade, Emily Warren Roebling solved problems. Publicly, Emily was only helping her husband while he managed the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, but in reality, she was a surrogate chief engineer. Despite this, the original plaque on the bridge only mentioned her husband and father-in-law. She didn't get her own dedication until 1951, which is 70 years, nearly 70 years, after the bridge was opened and long after she had died. After the bridge's construction, Emily Warren Roebling moved to Trenton, New Jersey with her husband, where she used her new skills to manage the construction of their mansion. Later in life, she studied law at New York University, so graduating from law, and was a women's rights advocate, writing an award-winning article criticizing the many laws that discriminated against women. Have you heard of the film and the book it's based on, Hidden Figures, about the Black women who solved complex maths problems by hand for engineers and other scientists working at NASA in the 1930s and 1960s? Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, Mary Jackson, and their colleagues overcame discrimination and racial segregation to become vital parts of maths, science, and engineering history. Or have you heard of Florence Nightingale? You might think of her as the founder of modern nursing. I always picture her in a horrible hospital with a candle. I think that's from my primary school days. She served as and managed nurses during the Crimean War. But did you know she was also a pioneering statistician? She realized that more soldiers were dying from unsanitary hospitals than from actual war wounds. She collected data to prove this and then came up with a new way to represent that data so people could understand it clearly and quickly. She was one of the first people ever to use infographics. STEM history is full of individuals who made important contributions to their field but weren't recognized publicly at the time or now because they weren't a man. I could tell you about so many amazing women. By the way, I did look for stories about non-binary folk from STEM history, but I couldn't find anything specific. This doesn't mean they're not there. It just means that the stories are even more hidden than women's. There is one more story I want to tell you about Dr. Donna Strickland. I've been watching Doctor Who, and Donna's back on Doctor Who. Another story about Dr. Donna Strickland. Born in Canada in the 1950s, Dr. Strickland studied engineering in physics at McMaster University, and then worked on high-intensity lasers for her PhD at the University of Rochester. In 1985, she and the team developed this technique called chirped pulse amplification. That is really important. It's just some words now, but that is really important. And it's used every year now still on millions of corrective eye surgeries, as well as in industrial machining and medical imaging. So very important. She went on to work at multiple universities and has worked to push the boundaries of optical science throughout her career. Decades later, in 2018, Dr. Donna Strickland and her original PhD supervisor, Dr. Gerard Moreau, were awarded the Nobel Prize for Physics. Amazing news, particularly as she was only the third woman ever to win it, and to date there have only been 5 women who have won the Nobel Prize for Physics. So far, so great. She did amazing work and she was recognized for it. So why am I telling you about her? Because in 2018, when she was awarded the Nobel Prize, she didn't have a Wikipedia page. 4 years before she won the prize, a wiki biography was created for her, and then in less than 6 minutes, the entry was flagged for speedy deletion and shortly thereafter removed from the site. Despite all of her achievements, someone decided that she was not important enough to warrant a Wikipedia biography. What happened to Dr. Donna Strickland's biography is not an anomaly. It's part of a pattern of women's biographies on Wikipedia being disproportionately viewed as unimportant or non-notable. Wiki articles about women's achievements and interests are massively underrepresented. English language Wikipedia contains more than 1.5 million biographies, and those are about writers, inventors, academics, but less than 19% of those biographies are about women. If you want to learn more about this, because actually it's a much bigger story, the wiki stuff, check out Dr. Jessica Wade, who is a British physicist who has made it her mission to raise the profiles of female scientists and scientists of colour by creating more than 2,000 Wikipedia pages. So, earlier in this presentation, I asked you to think about this phrase. What is niche is universal, and what is male is universal, and what is female is niche. So I'm going to give you some examples now of fails because women and non-binary folk weren't in the room when the important decisions were being made. Or if they were, the decision makers didn't listen to them. I'm hoping that by showing you these examples, you'll start to notice this in your own life. How many of your teachers are women? How about your school principal? Who is actually making those decisions for you? Do they look like you? And if they don't, how can they begin to understand your experience? Again, I'm going to refer you to this book, Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez. If you want to be informed but annoyed, then read this book. So let's talk about medicine. In a report issued by the US Government Accountability Office, 80% of drugs and medical devices that are pulled from the US market, so it's taken off the market, are done so because they have adverse effects on women. Have you heard of the sleeping tablet Ambien? When it was released in 1992 in the US, incidents of women having car crashes in the morning increased. While the weighted dose was correct for men, there were no women in the preclinical trials, which means it was never tested on women before it went to market. It turns out that women metabolize the drug at a different rate than men, leaving them over-medicated and drowsy in the morning, and therefore more likely to get into car accidents, even when they were prescribed the same weight-registered dose. So it turns out, women are not just small men. And it wasn't until 2013, which was 21 years later, that the FDA changed the recommended dose for women. What's interesting, and like everything else I've been talking about, really annoying, is that in biomedical research, which is the research to understand diseases, pursue treatments, test drugs, or know more about like biological processes, almost all of the trials, almost all of them use exclusively male animals as models. So this is known as the sex bias in basic science. This is even true, this is mad, this is even true in animal models of human disorders that are more prevalent in women. So like Alzheimer's, depression, anxiety, they're more likely to happen to women, but they're only tested in male animals. until recently, there's been some new legislation that means that scientists aren't allowed to do that anymore. So you could be forgiven for thinking, as many scientists have done in the past, that women, or better phrased, people who menstruate, are variable. You know, we have menstrual cycles which affect our hormones, our blood volume, and our brain connectivity across the month. If you take a group of women on a given day, you take them into a lab and do a test on all of them, some will have more progesterone or more estrogen in their bodies. Some would be on hormonal contraception, others might be peri or postmenopausal, but actually women's cycles are relatively steady, knowable and predictable if the effort is made to take this into account. Male hormones, however, are much more responsive to their social environments. Men tend to have this like peak of testosterone and another hormone called cortisol. They peak in the morning and then they drop off by about 40% in the evening. Fine. Testosterone is not cyclical. Sorry, testosterone is cyclical, but it's not regular. So if a man loses a sports match or is even watching a sports match on TV, or is voted for an election and their team loses, or the person who's voted for loses, you can see a suppression in their testosterone levels for days and sometimes even weeks. So while scientists have historically seen the male as universal and the female as niche, perhaps the reverse is true. Another area where women and non-binary folk are not considered the norm is in sports engineering. Sportswomen, even at elite levels, are expected to wear unisex shoes, but women's feet are not small male feet. Women's feet, heels, and arches are shaped differently to men's feet. Professional female football or soccer players are experiencing double the rate of ACL knee injuries than their male counterparts. These injuries can be like career-ending. They're really bad. Katrine Ockholm-Krieger, who is a medical researcher for FIFA, spoke to manufacturers in 2015, so 8 years ago, only to be told that boots for women were too niche and there would be no market. Still, it's very rare to get boots specifically made for women. Thing is, it's not true that there's no market, and it's not true that it's too niche. It's not just elite sportswomen who want proper equipment. Despite the smaller market size, in 2021, women's activewear and athletic footwear were the fastest growing in the sector. Businesses and brands are changing. After research that showed 90% of women have ill-fitting sports bras, which is ridiculous, Adidas launched a range of sports bras in 72 different sizes. But we need more change, more investment, and decision makers need to listen to women and non-binary folk more. Just as I could have gone on and on telling you about STEM history, I could tell you countless tales of these fails because women and non-binary folk were not taken into consideration. Fitbit's 2018 update included menstrual cycle tracking, but it would only let you log 10 periods of 10 days or fewer, which is useless for anyone who bled longer than this. Intermittent fasting, have you heard of this? Intermittent fasting, which experts claim can help you lose weight and help you live longer and is good for your brain, was only tested in a clinical trial on men. And while it works for men, it actually has the opposite effect on women. It mutes the signals to burn fat. In 2020, 41% of all gamers in the US were women. That's nearly half. But globally, only 16% of gaming exec positions are women. And outside of the boardroom, it's only 24%. In the UK, the government is currently facing a public inquiry into its response to the COVID pandemic. And one of the things that's been revealed is that not only did PPE not fit and therefore not protect female healthcare workers, you know, the whole point of it, but the UK government knew about this years before the pandemic and didn't do anything because the PPE was designed to be unisex. But in a world where the default is male, unisex doesn't really work for women. So I've just given you 24 minutes of bad news, and that all sucks. It's not great. But that's why we need more women and non-binary folk in STEM to increase the representation. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. I'm going to give you a really quick rundown of a business case written by the British not-for-profit The Wise campaign about why we need more women and non-binary folk in STEM. So UK businesses suffer a loss of £1.5 billion per year because of STEM shortages. Get more women, non-binary folk, and people from underrepresented racial backgrounds studying STEM, and there will be more skilled workers available. More women and non-binary folk working in STEM means a diverse way of thinking, which can give businesses an edge against their competitors. Following on from this, improved diversity means better products, better marketing, better customer experience. Did you know that a lot of AI is both sexist and racist? AI products from IBM, Microsoft, Amazon, and other companies, which are available for the public to buy, have been shown to have both skin type and gender bias. The AI was fed data that mostly featured white men, so it struggles to recognize darker skin tones and women. A more diverse workforce has a better understanding of the customer. And finally, it's more profitable. Women consumers are worth £12.45 trillion. Doesn't even seem like a real number. So it's worth making products that meet their needs. And companies with 3 or more female directors have been shown to significantly outperform those with less diverse boardrooms. Studies show that companies who have more equal representation outperform less diverse rivals by 3.1% per year. Again, that's loads of numbers. It's not just businesses that can benefit from more women and non-binary folk in STEM. You can too. If you choose to get a job in STEM, your earning potential increases by about 20%. STEM is a better paid sector, and more women and non-binary folk getting into STEM can decrease the gender pay gap. In the UK, there's a huge crisis in recruiting physics and computer science teachers. Even if 2/3 of the current physics university students went into teaching when they finished studying, if only 2/3 of them went into teaching when they finished their studies, that would only just cover the vacancies. And then who's going to be doing the research and the work? Improving the leaky pipeline means that less girls and non-binary students leave STEM education, and then there would be more people available to fill these roles. And then when we get more women in STEM, it's not just enough to recruit them. Workplaces need to be appealing enough to make women want to stay working there. A study by WISE, that same organisation, found that, quote, students and graduates are more likely to want to work for an organisation if they can see clear role models in senior positions, unquote. So the more women who work in STEM and the more visible those women become, the more the next generation of female graduates will want to get into STEM careers too, because they will be able to see that it is possible. There is a huge gap. There are lots of things that need to improve. It's obvious that things need to change from the top, but there are loads of things we can do from the bottom too. We can vote with our feet, the products we use, the jobs we apply for, the social media accounts we follow. We can find supportive STEM communities. There are loads of communities out there, just like this conference and STEM Untapped. We can shout about other people's achievements and our own. And we don't need to listen to the lies the patriarchy tells us about how girls and boys should be. So, to answer my question, why do we need more women in STEM? For loads and loads of reasons. For the economy, for diversity, for recruitment, for better research, products and science, but also because women and non-binary folk are amazing. You are amazing. And you deserve to follow your dreams. And it's not just me who says so. Our role models say the same thing. We need more women in STEM because it's not just men who are great at STEM. Tolly Lope, who was the first role model in our first ever episode, said, quote, "I don't want it to be 2023 and we're still doing girls in STEM. It should be normal by them, you know. I don't want to have to do this in another 10 years, unquote." So how do you make sure you succeed in STEM? You need to find communities. You need to find STEM role models. And they don't need to be, oh, hang on. I thought I had another slide. Apologies. And they don't need to be famous or on TV or CEOs of huge companies. They could be the student a few years ahead of you who's already studying at college or university, or they could be your teacher. They could be your friends who are working on a really cool project. They could be one of our many STEM Untapped role models. Have a look at all of our podcast episodes and blogs about women and non-binary folk in STEM careers. So I want to end this presentation with a quote by another amazing woman who I had the opportunity recently to interview for a podcast episode. Dr. Anne-Marie Amapadon co-founded STEMettes, which is a social enterprise dedicated to inspiring and promoting girls, young women, and non-binary folk in the STEM sectors. Quote, "The limitations we put on the imagination of others by not telling a breadth of stories has an impact on the tech in our lives. If more people of all genders were more aware of the rich heritage women have enjoyed in the technical space, the limits on our imaginations would disappear. If we only have half of society sitting at the decision-making table, we're not doing it properly, unquote. So I hope that you go away from this presentation today with the knowledge that, yes, it is hard. Women and non-binary folk have a disadvantage, but also for centuries, women and non-binary folk have been making a difference. And it's important that we continue to do so. At STEM Untapped, we show you real stories from real life female and non-binary folk in STEM. And if you would like to learn more about the experiences of people who work in engineering, so civil, electrical, naval engineering, of vets, animal trainers, astronomers, psychologists, and loads more, have a listen to our podcast episodes, STEM Untapped. You can find them on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find the podcast. And we've also got blogs from amazing role models on our website, and then behind the scene videos on our Instagram of like day in the life, what it's like working in different roles. And we're releasing a new series in the new year, and the special bonus episode with Dr. Anne-Marie Emapadon about women in tech. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Izzy. I know this is pretty late for some people, but I'm really sure they enjoyed this talk. I think it was really inspiring, not only for women, but also for men, because they also need to educate themselves on these issues.
Mm-hmm.
And before some questions from the audience start coming in, I have a few questions myself.
Yeah, sure.
So if you don't mind the short Q&A.
Yeah.
So you started this talk with saying you can't be what you can see. And how do you think this has developed in today's world? More importantly, like, do you think the major organizations, in my mind right now, I have like organizations like NASA, for example, or like these major STEM organizations, do you think they're playing their role in this thing, or do you think they're far behind and could still do much better in like getting rid of the biases, etc.?
So first of all, the phrase "you can't be what you can't see," sometimes that is unfair. Adriana, you're amazing, obviously, with the work that you're doing, and some people don't need role models or have gone and done it anyway despite having fewer role models. But often that's definitely how I feel about things. That's often how our role models feel about things. Businesses, organizations can do more. They need to do more. And I think a lot of it is the old guard is dying out. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, there would have been 100% men, white men on the board, the decision makers. And now there's 26% of the UK workforce is female. I don't have the stats about how many women are on the boards, but more women, more people of color, more people with disabilities are on the boards. But it needs to improve, it needs to get better. And I think as time progresses, it will get better. But I think organizations could definitely be working harder to change that. Whether it's like having like a minimum requirement when recruiting, you could say that a recruitment's not finished until you've interviewed at least one woman or at least one woman or one person of color. You might not employ them, but you've at least, as people who work in the business, listen to somebody else's opinion, someone's different opinion. I think there are lots of things that businesses could do. So it's improving, but it needs to be better.
All right, thank you. And now maybe something more related to our students, because this is something also I personally experienced and still kind of do a lot. So what tips or advice would you give to like a young woman who wants to study STEM, but often finds herself, let's say, the only one in the class, or like always surrounded by men? Maybe her teachers are only men, her classmates in those physics or robotics classes are men. What advice would you give to her?
Seek out other women. You might not find them in your classroom, so see if you can find them online. See if you can find them on social media. See if you can find out that there's another college or another school locally. Is there someone else doing it? It is more work. It's more work for you, unfortunately. But by having colleagues, people who have that boys are fine, boys are great, sure. I've got friends who are boys, you know, that thing. I've got two sons, and I think it's important that we look after boys, but I personally think it's more important that we look after girls, because it's harder for girls and non-binary folk. So you're going to have to do that extra step. You're going to have to maybe reach out to a teacher who's not your immediate teacher, but is like another science teacher who is a woman or person of color, or someone that you recognize who you want to have that connection with, and say to them, you know, I would actually really like to find out more about other girls. Are there clubs you can join? There's loads of things on social media that you'll be able to find, and you'll often find that they're run by not grown-ups like me, but by teens who want to share with other teens. So there are lots of connections you can make, but unfortunately they're not always immediately in the classroom.
Yeah, actually, now that you mentioned kind of the difference between teens or like adults leading this stuff, do you think that teens, not only female but also non-binary, etc., do you feel like they are making a much more positive change and that things will change with this generation, or we are kind of still stuck in the same?
No, I think a floodgate has been opened, and this is just from my personal experience, from talking with teens, working with teens in my job, also looking at the numbers. I think a floodgate's been opened, and I think if we, the older generation, and we, the teens at the moment, if we can work together, we can, you know, send that tidal wave down and do something about it and change things. And it might be that businesses need to change, and universities need to change, and courses need to change, and we'll end up doing things differently, but there is such this huge positive movement, and it's just keep going. Like, it is really fucking hard, sorry to swear, it is really hard, and I'm sorry about that, but you can do it. Like, just keep going, and you can do it, and you'll find your peers who feel the same, and they will help you.
Okay, and maybe like a last question,
Mm-hmm.
because we know that females should be looking out for their role models, etc. But what could men do to help support this movement, or young female or females in general in science?
There's a few things they can do. Number one, listen to women. I think listening to women is like the most important thing. Listen, and then if possible, believe women. That's quite important too. But just, you know, understand that women and non-binary folk have real experiences and that they are valid. And secondly, there's this thing that I've read about called the trick. So there's this like lie that the patriarchy tells us, that girls play with Barbies and boys play with cars, or girls like cooking and cleaning and boys, you know, because they're better at it, and boys like playing video games or working on the computer. What men can do is not perpetuate that nonsense. Point out when people are saying absolute shit like that, and just be like, actually, I don't think that's true. Or even, where have you got your figures from? Can you cite your sources? Because it is a team effort, and I think there are loads of amazing supportive men, but sometimes they don't feel like they can say supportive things in front of other men. So it's that like actually saying, no thanks, let's not be like that to other men, or actually, can you shut up a sec because blah 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 woman was talking. That's what men need to do.
All right, yeah, that sounds like very good advice. And on a more personal note, like the very last question, because I personally need to admit that most of my role models are actually men, like the physicists and businessmen, they end up being men. So do you perhaps have a role model that's female that you'd like to mention?
Oh, great question that I hadn't actually thought of. I think Caroline Criado Perez, or I actually went to this amazing talk, and now that you've put me on the spot, I've totally forgotten her name.
You can just tell us like maybe what she did, or what stood out.
Just Googling it. Give me a sec. Here we go.
Okay.
This woman called Lucy Kirk. So Lucy Kirk is the author of a book called Bitch, which is amazing.
Okay.
And she's actually a zoologist, and I think she worked with can't find it on the front page of Google. She's amazing. I went to a talk of hers a couple of months ago, and she is a zoologist who has written a book about the history of females. So if you look at biology, exactly like I've been talking about with like studies, it's usually male animals that are looked at in the history of biology, and she's gone through and said, actually, why don't we look at women? And she talks about her work with this other woman. I can't remember the woman's full name, but her name's Patty, but I can't remember her surname. Patricia something rather. I think she's Brazilian, I would say. And Patty has this like huge collection of animal vaginas, like the biggest collection of animal vaginas in the world. And it's like, no one's thought to study that. It's just like, oh, the male duck has a corkscrew penis. Cool. But no one's gone, what does the vagina look like? So I think Lucy Cook is amazing because she loves to talk about vaginas, and she loves to talk about the importance of them. And she's got this really great book called Bitch that you should read.
All right. Well, I hope anyone who is interested goes for this book. And there are no other questions coming in, so I think we could end this here. Patrick should be joining us soon.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi.
Hi again. So yeah, I think this was a really interesting talk. I certainly also as well learned a lot. So yeah, thank you for that, Izzy.
You're welcome.
And yeah, I think with that we can probably conclude our day here. So it's been a really good first day. We've had a lot of strong talks, especially focused for our high school students and about university admissions. And now we had the women in STEM. So it was really interesting. And tomorrow we'll kick off with a number of other topics, including more technical ones, like, for example, the use of AI in space exploration and others. So we'll go over that. And we're starting tomorrow at, I believe, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So looking forward to seeing everyone there.